Professor Neil Johnson never imagined that he would be applying physics and math to the study of insurgent warfare.
It's certainly something that you'd want to be aware of. I think certainly if I was going out to any kind of conflict, and I'd like to know about this.
According to the United States Department of Defense, more than 6,000 troops have been killed and 45,000 wounded during the current wars against insurgent forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. Johnson is a physics professor at the University of Miami and says that he has found a formula that can help predict insurgent attacks and save lives.
The interest to me was really to do with the numbers that we all hear every night. That those numbers, as they tend to seem to me, just looking every night, seem kind of random. We were trying to see if there was some pattern to the numbers.
To research these attacks, Johnson looked at records from both Afghanistan and Iraq to understand insurgency. Johnson's formula examines data from one particular province to predict when the next attack will occur in that area, taking into account both the amount of attacks that have already occurred and the escalation rate for that particular province.
Basically, the formula breaks down into the time between the nth and the nth plus 1 event is given by the time between the first two events multiplied by the number of the event, the n, to the power of negative some negative number. That negative number is the escalation rate.
In other words, if two attacks happen in the same province, Johnson takes the time between those two incidents and plugs it into the equation along with the escalation rate of attacks in the province. This equation then gives an estimate of the number of days until the next predicted attack in this province. According to Johnson, on a given day, there is at most one fatal attack per province. Johnson will consider any given attack from any weapon so long as it's fatal. In limiting the equations to just one type of weapon, a pattern emerges. The patterns that emerge from this formula show that the way in which the attacks increased in frequency was based off of a learning curve for human progress. The time that it takes insurgents to learn and improve their methods is similar to learning nonviolent tasks, such as riding a bike. There is, however, a slight complication, in that insurgent learning curves balance both the progress of insurgents and that of the opposition.
Yeah, there's a subtle twist. There's a subtle twist that when you ride a bike, the bike isn't doing anything to stop you from riding it. I mean, it may be wobbly, but it's wobbly. It's always wobbly in the same way. It's not trying to out-wobble you.
Fighting insurgency, however, is more complicated. Because the military is attempting to prevent insurgents from improving their ability to kill, the insurgents face a more difficult learning curve. Both sides create a co-competing learning environment. Because the formula takes into account both the insurgents and the military opposition, military officials can use it to understand which side is succeeding. In examining which provinces in Afghanistan and Iraq contain insurgents who are experiencing either rapid or stagnated learning curves, military officers will be able to determine which methods are effective in counterinsurgency. The Defense Department is currently building schools and having military troops interact with locals in provinces. If these tactics succeed, we will see less frequent attacks. What's more, the formula is informative even when it fails to predict the next attack. When such a change occurs, interpreters of the formula can infer that either side has done something to change the situation.
Things don't happen that way. It's because red side or the blue side, but of course blue side knows what they've done, but then we can infer the red side have done something.
Johnson argues that we can learn both where things are headed and, in the case when attacks deviate from the formula, when things have changed. And when the formula is incorrect, interpreters can then go and examine what might have changed.
It's like a weather report in that sense.
Researching with University of Miami undergraduates skilled in political science, biology, and mathematics, Johnson believes that working with students from different areas of academia showed that disciplines can overcome their boundaries and contribute to a larger concept. Johnson's interdisciplinary formula informs military officials of insurgents' abilities, regardless of accurately predicting the next attack.
We produced something that was kind of bigger than the individual parts. I absolutely think that it certainly taught me, and I hope it's shown other people, what can be contributed across the boundaries of disciplines in the field of conflict and war studies and help for the U.S.
Although he has already published papers in regards to this formula, Johnson now looks to examine how these factors are affecting the learning curves. Spencer Curran, a senior biology and applied math major at the University of Miami, worked with Johnson on this research. Curran attested to the comprehensiveness of combining academia and conflict studies.
There were a lot of nights where I'd be up 1 or 2 in the morning emailing back and forth with Dr. Johnson about something we were working on in relation to the paper. We've been going at this nonstop for about almost a year and a half now.
Curran and Johnson have placed a lot of effort into their research because their work is extremely relevant. According to the International Security Assistance Force, insurgent attacks have grown by 20% or more each year in Afghanistan since 2006. It's undeniable that insurgency is on the rise and that the United States must examine the way in which it can battle such attacks if it plans to maintain deployment in these regions. Without signs of their research tapering off in the near future, Johnson and his group recognize the importance of including academia into conflict studies. Johnson notes that because the United States has a finite defense budget, it is impossible to put everyone, everywhere, all of the time. Such a formula can help determine which resources should go to which provinces. Although this formula is far from perfect, Johnson argued that the insight it can provide fuels the need for further research. The ability to enter a conflict with any concept of what one will be facing is what drives counterinsurgency research, especially since these attacks are not, in fact, random.
That kind of insight, particularly in terms for the U.S. policy in the future, could help.
Though the formula may remind you of Numbers, a television program based on solving crime through mathematical reasoning, Johnson is clear to point out that conflict is not quite as idealistic as a television program.
House is to medicine as Numbers is to this. We would love it to be as neat as that. It's like a never-ending Numbers episode.
For Johnson, this formula shows the importance of individual perspectives and contributions.
I would encourage anyone that has any good ideas, who looks at the numbers in the newspapers, hears the numbers on the news, you get a sense that somebody must be working on it and they must have worked it all out. Well, that's not the case, and it's not that there aren't bright people looking at things. It's just that, every person looking at it can contribute something, and it might even be new.
Johnson's formula is only the start of academia's involvement in conflict studies. As the insurgents experience this learning curve, U.S. military officials must begin to counteract them. Perhaps the formula will not predict every future insurgency attack, but it has opened the discussion to studying insurgents. For War News Radio, I'm Aileen Eisenberg.